Welcome to episode 2 of the View from the Stands podcast. We made it past episode 1. Mom liked it enough, so we figured, what the heck, we'll do another one. So as always, we got Cameron and Taylor here. Obviously, we're gonna kind of address some of the things that have happened in this last week with free agency starting. It's been a pretty crazy week, huh, Taylor?
Yeah, there's been a lot. NFL has turned over a new leaf with the free agency. The NBA kind of had the fast-paced free agency, who's going to go where. You kind of had all this turmoil kind of going on, and now the NFL is adopting that same mindset, which has really, really shaken up the way that the off-season kind of unfolds.
Yeah, not only that, they're throwing out the money that the NBA was throwing out. I mean, you got guys, we don't get into this very in depth, but you got guys that are solid, number 3, number 2 wide receivers making $40 million in 4 years kind of thing. I mean, there's just...
Yes, they're unheard of contracts are basically what's been the norm. So I don't know how much longer we can say it's a surprise when these people sign these big deals, because if you want to land a free agent, that's what you got to do.
Yeah, so I mean that's kind of what we'll jump right in here. What the Titans have done. Obviously, there was a lot of stuff that kind of went on before free agency with regards to trades. Some big people in the trade market were the Rams and things like that. But when free agency kicked off, the Titans, unlike years past when they kind of would stay put and not really do much in the free agent market, and if they did, they were signing kind of more rotational type of guys like an Eric Walden last year. They went out and got two pretty big signings, and a couple of these were positions that we were expecting. A couple weren't. One of the ones that we were expecting was Dion Lewis.
Yes.
Great pickup for the Titans here. What do you think, Tay?
Jitterbug, man. That's all I could say. That was a nickname given to him by Julian Edelman while he was in New England, and that just kind of pays tribute to his elusiveness and how hard he is to tackle, especially in the open space. Guys like that, you can't have enough of them on your team.
Yeah, and a lot of people I know. I want to say his name is Kyle Brandt on Good Morning Football. I mean, he brought up a great point. This combination, and like I mentioned this before, I know it's going to be very reminiscent of those late 2000 teams with Chris Johnson and with Lindell White. You got a big bruising back in Derrick Henry who can carry the load and get those tough yards when you need him to. And then you got a guy like Dion Lewis out of the backfield that, as he mentioned in his press conference, he's not an easy guy to tackle, but he's not going to run you over like Derrick Henry is. He's going to get you off balance, and he's going to hit you on the sides and kind of go through you as well. So should be a really interesting thing to see how Matt LaFleur uses him in his offense. I know he had similar types of backs when he was in Atlanta with Devontae Freeman and Tevin Coleman. So we'll see kind of how LaFleur uses him in the offense, but I'm excited. I think we should have some great situational types of matchups that we can use on third downs and on passing downs with Lewis, matching him up against linebackers, and obviously there might be situations where he's against a safety, but I mean, you saw what he did in the short time that he was really getting a bulk of the touches in the New England backfield. I mean, he was just lighting teams up.
Yeah, I think that 1-2 punch is going to be exactly what the Titans offense needs to kind of base their whole scheme around.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was just going to say, and you look at other teams that have had something similar to this. I mean, the Titans last year with DeMarco Murray and Derrick Henry, you saw how fresh Derrick Henry was in that Chiefs game in the playoffs. You saw the Eagles and the Patriots both employing pretty deep backfields. I think it's just, one, it's great for in-games because obviously you've got guys that you can just keep rotating them in and they're fresh, but not only in games. I think the bigger impact is throughout the season. You can limit the wear and tear on guys' bodies, especially a guy like Derrick Henry, who in those late December, early January playoff type games where it's cold outside and it hurts to get hit. I mean, you want him to be fresh and ready to run somebody over in those times. So I think great pickup, and not only that, the contract that John Robinson negotiated. I mean, in J. Rob we trust, right? I mean, he's just not only
he makes us proud.
Not only did he get a great free agent signing, but the deal that he got him to was, I mean, it's a great deal for both sides. Honestly, I think it gives the team some flexibility, but it also pays a guy who is, I think, going to have a pretty big impact on the team this next year.
So, yeah. I think we're going to be surprised at how much usage we get out of Dion Lewis. I feel that he will be the lead back and kind of take that. I can't even. DeMarco Murray, couldn't think of his name there. It's going to take that role of the pass protector / out of the backfield, running the flares, running the screens, and then using Derrick Henry as the game rolls along to kind of pound a defense and also goal line situations. And so I think we're going to have some fans that are going to kind of grumble at first based on, the usage, because we've all been waiting for the emergence of Derrick Henry for the full-time back, and everybody thinks, you keep feeding him, he gets better and better, which it's hard to argue. But for what kind of scheme that LaFleur is going to bring in, I mean, you look back at what he did in St. Louis, or in LA, I'm sorry. He runs that system that he uses the back a lot out of the backfield. And Derrick Henry, don't get me wrong, I mean, he proved he can take a pass out of the backfield 80 yards, but he doesn't have that elusive, quick twitch that Dion Lewis has, and can kind of change the way a defense has to scheme against you.
Yeah, I don't know. It'll be interesting to see. I still kind of get the feeling that Derrick Henry is going to be the guy. I don't think it'll be a huge discrepancy. I'd probably say like a 60-40 in the carries. If Derrick Henry's not the lead guy, I could see it being pretty much a 50-50. A little bit more touches this year than he had last year with DeMarco Murray. But either way, I think that is going to be one of Derrick Henry's big offseason. One of the big things he's going to work on this offseason is his ability to pass protect and his ability to be quick in his routes, quick out of his breaks, and show some solid hands. I think that's really the only aspect of his game that is lacking, that is keeping him from, like you said, Taylor, a lot of us fans, that's the only thing keeping him from becoming that back that we all expect him to be, and being the guy who gets 25 to 30 touches like a Todd Gurley or like a Le'Veon Bell, where they're getting touches and you hardly ever see him off the field. I'm curious though, because with the contract, I don't think there will be a huge discrepancy between his carries and Dion Lewis's, especially because Dion Lewis, he is a good runner between the tackles. I mean, you watch him during some of those games with the Patriots, and he did a great job of running between the tackles, not only outside the tackles. So should be really interesting to play out. But the best part about it is, I mean, you've got everybody's going to be thinking who's going to get more touches. That's the best kind of I guess problem you can have in your backfield, is having two guys who can be those cowbell, or those bell cow type of backs, not cowbell. Sorry, I'm thinking Will Ferrell. Those bell cow type of backs. So it's a good problem to have with the Titans, and I think we'll discuss this a little bit later. This might also be a position that they target later in the draft, or look to pick up somebody as an undrafted free agent. But we'll kind of get there. But the next big signing, and this was. I mean, you could argue that this is probably one of the biggest free agent signings that the Titans have had in who knows how many years. But the addition of Malcolm Butler. What are your thoughts?
Malcolm Butler, former New England Patriot, come up in the Belichick scheme. You've seen articles around, kind of coming from the bottom to the top, as far as his kind of road to the NFL. He's been a heck of a worker. Anybody you ask that's been in practice with him or has played ball with him just talks about his work ethic and how hard he hits the gym, he hits the off-season workouts to get better, and has that mindset of, I'm out here to prove something, and he's got that chip on his shoulder. I think that's going to be awesome for our team, especially reuniting him with Logan Ryan and giving us some flexibility with being able to play him in the slot. And the familiarity between the two hopefully will be just like they never skipped a beat once they get on the field together. And then you throw in Adoree on the outside. I think we have one of the best up-and-coming secondaries in the league. All these guys are all young. Butler a little older. I want to say he's around 28. But Logan Ryan still in his mid-20s, and obviously Adoree Jackson just coming into his second year, and then you throw Byard on top of that. We've got a lot of promising years ahead of us when it comes to coverage, which is, thank God, finally I don't have to sit there and hope and pray that nobody realizes we can't stop the pass and they just shoot us up and down the field for 350 yards passing a game. It'll be nice to have some help back there.
Yeah, I mean, I can't tell you, again, it's been a problem for the Titans since who knows how long. I mean, it's been years and years and years since they've had a decent backfield, probably since you had Samari Roll and Lance Schulters back there in the secondary, those couple of years.
Yep.
But no, like you mentioned, I think great signing for the Titans.
Finnegan, too.
Yeah, Cortland Finnegan. Oh, man, now that you say Cortland Finnegan, I feel like Malcolm Butler will probably bring that similar attitude. Cortland Finnegan was a
nasty, just in your face.
He would do anything, and all the like you said, reading about Malcolm Butler and what his teammates have said and what receivers have said. He doesn't care who he's guarding. He doesn't care if it's Julio Jones, if it's Antonio Brown. He doesn't care about the name. He just knows. It's kind of like a dog, I guess. He's just got that dog mentality where he just says, you're in the way and you're keeping me from what I want to accomplish, and so I don't care who you are, I'm going to run you over kind of thing, or I'm going to beat you. I mean, you look at that secondary now, I think you've got, obviously, Logan Ryan will be a great leader, but Malcolm Butler steps into that room and adds that dynamic that Kevin Byard also has. I mean, you look at him, Kevin Byard today got in some Twitter beef with Deion
Sanders, yes.
Yeah, so I mean, you've got two guys in that defensive backfield, and Malcolm Butler and Kevin Byard, who feel like they've been overlooked, who feel like they've been shortchanged their whole life, and they just are out to prove anything and everything they can to these people that doubted them. And I mean, there is nobody that I would rather have in that defensive backfield than guys with that type of attitude. So. Should be a great signing. And not only that, I think one of the big things that obviously everybody wanted to question and people thought would be a big kind of talking point with regards to Malcolm Butler, a reason he might not get paid as much, all these different types of things, was his benching in the Super Bowl. But I know it's kind of been circulating, but I mean, unless you watch that press conference, the guy handled that with such class. It just goes to show you that he is the exact type of player you want in an organization.
Yeah, you got to agree. I mean, you don't have guys from former teams just speaking out about players that leave, just commending them on all of the hard work that they brought into the team and just the type of person that he is. I mean, that speaks wonders because people leave teams, get cut all the time. You never hear anybody saying stuff. You got guys like Tom Brady sticking up for Deion, and that just makes you feel confident that you picked a guy and you're bringing a guy into your organization that is going to be a stand-up guy and somebody you want to be part of your franchise.
Yeah. So, I mean, again, we could talk for hours and hours about these two big free agent signings, obviously with Dion Lewis and the impact he'll have on the offense and giving Marcus a good playmaker. And then obviously Malcolm Butler, I think that really mitigates a lot of the needs that we had with regards to edge rushers and different types of things like that. Obviously still a huge, huge need for the Titans, but obviously if you can put pressure on receivers and keep them from getting open, then it's much easier to get pressure on the quarterback. Brian Arakpo even mentioned it in an interview recently, that just you give those guys an extra second, an extra half second to get to the quarterback, whether they make the sack or not. You should see some of the numbers with regards to pressures, with regards to quarterback hits, and with regards to sacks, in my opinion, all increase pretty substantially due to the talent that we have in that defensive backfield. It's just, there's not a single position where I feel like we aren't having a top tier corner or a top tier safety. So things are looking up in the defensive backfield, and hopefully, kind of going from the back to the front, it'll have some pretty good ripple effects. So now the Titans also did make some other free agent signings. Granted, they weren't really free agents; they were kind of players that they had as unrestricted free agents. Granted, but they were former players with Josh Klein and with Daquan Jones. They signed both of those guys to help shore up the offensive line and the defensive line. They also tendered Quentin Spain. He's yet to receive an offer, so we'll see what happens there. And that could affect a lot of what goes on in the draft with regards to the offensive line. But
two key pieces returning there on the front seven on both sides. Good job keeping those guys around. One of those things where luckily the money was right, and the sides both able to agree on that, because I think Klein will do well with this new style of offense. The blocking scheme fits his athletic build a little more, keeps him a little bit more agile, a little more attacking instead of being on the defensive. Same thing with Daquan Jones on the other side of the ball. I think this new defense will cater to him once we get some more edge pass rushers. He does a good job of getting some pressure up the middle, helping Casey out when Casey's double teamed. So I feel like he fits into what we've been doing, and he's got a good chemistry with the guys that we have coming back up front. So two solid pickups that are definitely going to help us.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think also the big part of it is to keep that continuity on that offensive line. Well, obviously we'll see what happens with Spain, like I mentioned, but just keeping those guys together, I think that's one of those positions where chemistry is extremely crucial. So I think good moves here, like you said, with both the money and with the players by John Robinson. Obviously, we didn't keep all the players that we had as free agents. Some of the big ones that we lost were Avery Williamson, which is a big blow, but obviously it's something that we will definitely see the Titans.
Wish him the best. Yeah, wish him the best of luck, but unfortunately the money wasn't right, and nothing but good wishes for him and his future. Avery Williamson, former Kentucky alum, so hope the best for him.
Yeah, and obviously now that's a position that previously we weren't sure if the Titans were going to address that in the draft, and if they were, we weren't quite sure at what point. But obviously that and edge rusher now become kind of those two big positions that you really need to address. And we'll kind of get into that a little bit later. But the other one that we lost in free agency that will be something, again, the Titans will probably have to address in the draft as opposed to free agency, just due to the lack of depth in the market, is Curtis Riley, the special teamer and the backup safety to Kevin Byard. Big loss. Taylor, I know you're a big fan of him. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, he was a big part of the special teams, was one of those guys that did anything you asked him to do, was always given 100%. He did fill in at safety a little bit, and from what I saw, he did a good job whenever he was asked to step in and take larger roles in some games. So we had some injuries to some safeties and some DBs last year, and he was able to come in and fill a role. He's a young guy. I wish we could have kept him around. Not sure what the scenario was with that, but he's only 25, so he's been in the league a couple of years, and was making progress. So I hate to see him go. I think he could have helped us a lot in that secondary, especially with the loss of Cersei already. And so we'll see what happens, but I hope they're able to bring in another key piece like that. I know they're talked about Brandon Tralwitt kind of taking on a bigger role. He's been a special teams guru. That's the reason they brought him in specifically, was for the special teams. And I know they've talked about expanding a little bit of his workload, but we'll see how that does once they kind of bring him into the system there.
Yeah, and some other people that I've heard from, some articles and different types of things, is that they last year were looking to convert Kalen Reed, Mr. Irrelevant, in 2016, I think. They were looking to convert him to a safety, but felt he'd be better off at corner. So that might be something they reevaluate. So they may or may not address this in the draft. Either way, I think that is a position where we need to either switch somebody over or get somebody into that safety spot, and by doing so, I think that gives us not only a very talented defensive backfield, but it should give us a fairly deep defensive backfield as well, especially at the cornerback position. But
for sure,
go ahead.
Which that kind of leads us into cap space, which obviously plays a huge role into why and who gets released and all the kind of underground stuff that most of the time isn't talked about. We can kind of jump into a little bit of what the Titans have left. I know we're sitting at around that $40 million under the cap still, with free agency to come, and Mariota and Lawan's contracts going to be renewed at some point during either the off season or between now and next season, which will take a big chunk out of what we have there. So do you think, Cameron, that we will go for any more of the high-profile free agents, or is it going to kind of play out where we kind of lay low and see what happens with the draft and save up money for these two big players? Because Lawan will be the highest paid safety, the highest paid left tackle in the game once they restructure his contract. Same thing with Mariota. He won't be the highest paid quarterback, but you see the money getting thrown around. He will be top 5 once the new contract is signed.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see with those deals, especially with the Marcus Mariota deal, seeing what Kirk Cousins got, where he got so much guaranteed, how much of that will spill over into other quarterback deals. But yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of. Obviously, the Titans are going to have to make some moves in free agency with the release of Sylvester Williams 1 year into his 3-year deal, and also with the release of Carl Klug. Hate to see Carl Klug go. He was just the epitome of the blue-collar guy. I mean, he would just come to work every single day, every single game. He would work his tail off and just do everything you needed him to do. He was just kind of the Mr. Reliable. He would always be involved. So with that, I know a lot of people on Twitter, a lot of people in all these different websites are talking about Ndamukong Suh. I like the idea. I don't love it. There are certain aspects. Obviously, you've got his former D-line coach is now the D-line coach here in Tennessee, and so he's talked to him. I mean, at 31, obviously, Ndamukong Suh is an incredible player. Still has a lot left in the tank, I think. But I'm curious to see, like you said, it all depends on the money. Obviously, if the deal's right, I think he could be a great fit. I think you could use Daquan Jones in that defensive tackle role and then slide Ndamukong Suh over into a defensive end in the 3-4. Or you could try and keep it the same. Obviously, they can kind of toy with those different types of things. But there's a ton of competition for Ndamukong Suh. I saw today that he is also added the Raiders to his list. So now you have the Saints, the Titans, the Rams, the Raiders, and the Seahawks. So he's got a lot of people looking for him, and I'm afraid that if the Titans lose out on him and we don't have a backup plan, we might be in trouble on the defensive line and might have to throw some people in there with regards to depth, because obviously you've got Austin Johnson, but you'd love to have a couple more people on that defensive line to rotate and do something kind of similar to what the Philadelphia Eagles did this year. I think defensive line is a place where you can't have too much depth. So with all that being said, I kind of rambled there for a minute. I think a big offseason signing could be Jonathan Hankins. He was 1 year into a big deal with the Indianapolis Colts, but the Indianapolis Colts, with their new head coach and their new defensive coordinator and things like that, have switched over from a 3-4 defense to a 4-3. So it'll be interesting to see where he goes. I know he's obviously visited the Redskins, but I think this is a guy the Titans could really look to have shore up that run defense. Obviously, Daquan Jones is a great run stuffer, but this guy, Jonathan Hankins, I mean, he's listed at 6'3", over 320 pounds, and he also, I think, one of the things that might help the Titans over other teams, one is the cap space, like you mentioned, Taylor, around that $40 million mark, but also the fact that during his junior year at Ohio State, he was coached by none other than Mike Vrabel on the defensive line at Ohio State. So there's a connection there, and I think he's a great fit. I mean, he's a true defensive tackle for a 3-4. And he's just a big guy. He can eat up double teams, and then he can allow guys like Daquan Jones to take a lot of the pressure off of those linebackers, especially if we have to put a rookie, whether it's somebody that we acquire in the draft or through a trade or something like that, but maybe an inexperienced linebacker should be able to take a lot of pressure off of those guys and allow them to easily jump some lanes and get some tackles in the backfield and obviously just shore up that run defense. So long story short, I think Jonathan Hankins is a guy, whether they get Ndamukong Suh or not, it kind of will be the determining factor in this, but if they don't get Ndamukong Suh, I would love to see the Titans go after Jonathan Hankins, as I think he is. He's just going to be a good guy that would fit into this scheme really well and really help the Titans' defense.
Yeah, sorry, I agree. I think with his connection with Vrabel, that definitely helps that relationship, being that they know each other, and he could be a good piece to replace a Sly Williams and come in and basically fill the role that we wanted Sly Williams to fill, and he just did not live up to what we had expected of him, and that led to his release. So I think that's a good free agent. There's not a whole lot of free agents out there that you're gonna know of. I've heard some receivers been thrown around, Jordan Matthews and Macklin. Also heard Navarro Bowman, an inside linebacker, being thrown around. I think Bowman would be a good pickup for the linebacker position. Again, it all depends on what the contract situations look like, but he's on the back end of his career too. He's turning 30. He's already torn his Achilles and his ACL. So if the money's right, he would be good as far as a temporary inside linebacker, but we would still, I would hope, go after another one in the draft, someone to kind of pair along with Jayon Brown and those nickel formations. Wesley Woodyard, we could probably hope to get a few more years out of him if we're lucky, but he's in his 30s and he's getting up there in age. So, I don't know what the free agency market looks like. It makes me wonder if the draft is kind of where they've got their heads at right now.
Yeah, I think the draft will be someplace that they'll try to address that. Obviously, Navarro Bowman, I think, would be a fairly similar player to Avery Williamson in that he's a great run stuffer, but probably not a guy that you're going to leave out there all three downs, which makes it so that makes me, I guess, a little cautious on if they do sign Navarro Bowman. I would hope it's at a fairly decent discount, knowing that he is not your typical three-down linebacker. So,
yeah. For sure.
Well, obviously, the Titans not only, I mean, we've kind of addressed the defensive line a little bit more towards the interior and inside linebacker, which I think we can both agree, and I think most people agree, are places where the Titans need to address. But the biggest need the Titans need to address is the edge rusher. That 3-4 outside linebacker, obviously Brian Arakpo and Derek Morgan are both on the bad side of 30, and their contracts are set to expire next year, if I'm not mistaken. But both of them have fairly large cap hits as well, so they're obviously going to be here for the next year. But who knows how much longer they'll be in a Titans uniform. I know most mock drafts are picking the Titans to select Harold Landry if he's there in that first round, but I know that there's some other options. I know, Taylor, you've got one. Who was the guy you were looking at?
I've seen a couple different ones. Josh Sweat is one that they've brought in and recently kind of had a little sit down with, doing their interview process. He's out of Florida State, a 6'5", 250-pound edge rusher. He's got the athleticism. He doesn't have the most eye-popping stats. I think he was around 5.5 sacks this past season. But based on his size and his length, he does check a lot of the boxes as far as what you're looking for in an outside pass rusher. He's been a guy they've seen throw around. I've also seen some Sam Hubbards out of Ohio State, another edge pass rusher been thrown around, and then Marcus Davenport out of UT San Antonio. All those guys, edge rushers, they've all got some upside. It's really hard to tell what the kind of edges are amongst those guys. Personally, I kind of like the Davenport kid. I think he's long and athletic. Also, Sam Hubbard, though, he's kind of the same way. He actually, I read today where he went to, or was originally going to go to Notre Dame to play lacrosse, and was recruited by the crook Urban Meyer, and brought him in and actually brought him in and beefed him up and put him on D-line. He was a safety in high school, so they packed on some pounds to him, and he was able to perform at that heavier weight, which they've got him at 6'5", 265, so even bigger than Josh Sweat and Harold Landry. So Sam Hubbard, again, that Ohio State connection, he's got a high motor. I think he would be a guy that could kind of come in and make an impact instantly. Not quite on the level of a Joey Bosa or a Myles Garrett type edge rusher, but I do think that he has the athletic ability to be a huge impact on our defensive front.
Yeah, I think I really like that pick as well, Sam Hubbard. I think he also spent some time playing for Mike Vrabel, and if I'm not mistaken, he may have also been recruited. Don't quote me on that. By him as well. He might have been involved in the recruitment process. But yeah, I think he's one that I don't see the Titans taking him in the first round. I don't know. I know he's kind of one of those guys that's, they're, again, mock drafts, you kind of take them with a grain of salt, but I know he's been listed in a couple as, late, like 28, 29 is kind of the highest. And then I've seen him slip all the way back into late in the second round. So, if the Titans can get a guy like him in the second round, I think that's a steal. I would love to see them do that. I think they should address whether it's inside linebacker or edge with either both of those first two picks or for sure that number one or that first round pick. The only reason I could see them straying away from that is if they feel like there's a guy that they can't pass up on the offensive line. Whether that be a James Daniels, a Will Hernandez, somebody that we kind of mentioned last time. But yeah, I think.
Yeah, you never know with the draft. It all depends on who gets taken where, because it can shake up a board in a heartbeat.
That is true, and obviously, we've seen that with what happened with the Colts. A lot of people were thinking that Bradley Chubb or Saquon Barkley was going to be off the board at number 2 or number 3.
Not anymore.
And now, obviously, the Jets are trading up, and you're not trading up to draft a running back or an edge rusher. So count on the Jets to take a quarterback. I would not be surprised if you see more teams. I know I wouldn't be surprised if the Colts, if they can't find the guy they want, whether that's Bradley, whether that's Nelson, or Chubb, whether that's Chubb, Nelson, or Barkley. I wouldn't be surprised to see them trade back a couple more slots to somebody like the Cardinals or the Bills, who are quarterback needy teams and that are willing to jump up and pay a pretty hefty price for it. So that'll be interesting to see what happens. I think draft night you're gonna see some trades. I'd love to see John Robinson make some trades. Honestly, I think he might be able to move back. In that first round, I don't love the idea of him moving back in the first round. I'd rather see him trade some picks later. But yeah, I think there's some needs that the Titans have that aren't super glaring needs, but we need some depth, and I think that the draft would be a good place to address that, kind of like what we've mentioned with the safety, with the defensive line, different types of things like that. So
maybe a speed receiver too as well.
Yeah, I don't know. I see so many people talking about the Titans lacking that that playmaker on the outside, and I feel like it's tough because they tried to address that last year, right? They took Jonnu Smith, they took Taywan Taylor, they took Corey Davis. Obviously, Corey Davis was hurt. Taywan Taylor wasn't really able to find his way in Mike Mularkey's archaic offense.
He kept getting tackled by the turf monster.
Yeah, that too, and then obviously Jonnu Smith wasn't as solid blocking as they would have liked him to, so it kind of limited the situations in which they could put him in where people weren't able to notice that he was in and kind of assume that this was a pass play as opposed to a running play. So, I wouldn't mind them I wouldn't mind them looking into the wide receiver position, but I feel like of all the positions, that's one where the Titans, have a pretty decent amount of depth, especially with Tajay Sharp coming back from injury. But not only that, I looked up some of these undrafted wide receivers, and some of these names on this list were pretty surprising to me. You got a guy like Miles Austin for the Cowboys, Victor Cruz, Wes Welker, and then Rod Smith. Rod Smith, obviously, kind of one of the older people on that list. But these are
still an incredible receiver back in his time with Elway.
Without a doubt.
He won a couple Super Bowls, so
yeah,
a lot of people remember those rings speak for themselves.
Exactly. But so I guess my point here is that I wouldn't mind seeing the Titans go wide receiver, but if they went anything, I would say they should go 6th round later. 5th or 6th round and on. They shouldn't be taking a wide receiver unless they feel like this guy's going to be a complete game changer. And then, if anything, I feel like you can get one of those guys later in the draft that just kind of fall through, or also undrafted. I think that's also a pretty good avenue for people to go after at that wide receiver position. But we'll see what happens. I'm hoping the Titans can get, like I said, either an inside linebacker or an edge rusher with that number 25 pick, and then pretty much go defense all the way. The only thing that I think they could possibly look to address on the offensive side, like we kind of mentioned, receiver could be one, but I think also adding some good interior line depth. I think a guy that you might see round 2 or round 3, I'd love to see Billy Price. Obviously, we talked about him getting that unfortunate injury at the combine and slipping, but if he slips,
that could work in our favor.
Yeah, if he slips right into the Titans' hands in the 2nd or 3rd round as a guy who was projected as a late first rounder, that would be a great pickup and kind of give the Titans a safety net at the interior O-line positions. But we'll see what happens. Obviously, they drafted Corey Levin, so they could be pretty content with that. But lots of things to still kind of iron out. And through these next couple weeks of free agency and with who the Titans are bringing in on their visits and things like that, we can probably get a better idea of who they're looking to draft. I know at the Tennessee Pro Day, they spent some time with John Kelly, so running back could be a position that they look to address. I know John Robinson was out holding the pad for Khalil McKenzie through his drills. So it'll be interesting. It'll be interesting to see what the Titans do.
On the Tennessee note, one guy I would love to see get taken in one of the later rounds would be a Rashawn Golden. I feel he was the best defensive player on the Vols roster this past year, and yet was underutilized, which should go to no one's surprise based on the coaching situation. But he is a guy that when he was in, he made plays. He could come to the line. He could make tackles unproven running backs. I don't know if you've watched the SEC, but all those guys end up playing in the pros. And he's able to come up and make those tackles. He's able to defend. He's able to play the slot. He's able to play the outside. So he would be a guy that I would love to see on the team. And being John Robinson's connection with UT, he actually has a UT lanyard for his skis, in case anybody was wondering. So go Vols. He will be definitely on our radar come draft time.
Yeah, and I think a lot of Tennessee fans pretty fond of Rashawn Golden as well for his double middle finger to the Bama fans. I mean, that's about the only positive you could take from that game last year with them getting flomped. But
yeah, it's my favorite part of the game.
We'll take it. So real quick before we wrap up, we're going to kind of go through a couple more things here with regards to the rest of the AFC South.
Yeah, let's see what the rest of those losers, the second, third, fourth place teams are going to do. So let's check on the cronies.
Well, we'll start with the Colts. I'm pretty sure they're the ones who are making
first.
Yeah, they're the ones who are making the least amount of moves, and they're the ones who need to make the most moves. Kind of some of the big things we mentioned. They stockpiled some draft picks, which will help them, get some depth. But I don't know how many of those guys are going to be able to step in and contribute at a high level, especially in the division, which has become in a very short time one of the better divisions in the league. So we'll kind of see what happens with them. And then the other big signing, I think they finally got tired of Jack Doyle fumbling the ball against the Titans and dropping passes. So
he lit us up. I don't know about that. He had 8 or 9 catches the first time we played this year on Monday night, and then
but he fumbled the ball too. He dropped a couple too. I'll take it.
He did. I'm not arguing that, but that proved that we have some coverage issues, not just with our corners. Inside linebackers are in need of some work as well.
True. I mean, the stats showed that the Titans gave up an obscene amount of yards to running backs and tight ends as well. So, so they went out and signed former Detroit Lions tight end Eric Ebron to a 2-year deal. Ebron's an uber athletic tight end out of North Carolina. He's fairly young. I don't know exactly how old he is. I know he hasn't hit 30 yet, so should be a good weapon for Andrew Luck, especially since he lost Dante Moncrief in free agency, which takes us to another team in the division, which are the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Which, lo and behold, there's a guy named Dante Moncrief on that team.
Yeah, I mean, most people, unless you're a pretty intense follower of the AFC South, wouldn't have known too much about Dante Moncrief unless you had him on your fantasy team. Good player, obviously nothing spectacular, but with the
underachieved.
With the release of Keenan, what's his name? Oh, Alan
Keenan
Hearns.
Cole.
Sorry,
Alan
Hearns.
Brothers.
Yeah, with the release of Alan Hearns and Allen Robinson, they needed a guy who could step in and be kind of one of their go-to receivers. Another big move. So the Jaguars made 2 moves that were related, and then a third move. The 2 that were related were picking up Austin Seferian-Jenkins and dropping Mercedes Lewis. I know, Taylor, that's one you're a little worried about.
Yeah, he's proven that he's a heck of an athlete. He's 6'5", go up and get it tight end. Also got the ability to block. Showed his athleticism in Tampa before moving on to the Jets, and was proven at both those spots to be a handful to guard, especially coming out of the goal line sets. He's their go-to guy. Go up and get it, and unfortunately, that's not a guy that you want to see facing you every Sunday. He's a guy that can definitely make you hurt, make you cry, hit you where the sun don't shine type of thing. So,
well, especially with what we were just mentioning as well, with the inability to cover linebackers or cover tight ends super well by our linebackers. So
could be some issues there. So
yep.
hopefully Jayon Brown is a year wiser, a year faster, a year stronger, because we're going to need his coverage ability when we play Jacksonville this season.
Without a doubt. And then the last kind of big signing that we can mention, we will mention from the Jaguars, was going out and getting Andrew Norwell. Obviously, when I first saw the deal, I thought that they paid a king's ransom for a good left guard. I want to say he plays left guard. He might play right, but a guard nonetheless. But looking at the deal, he's got $30 million guaranteed in his deal. But that cap hit in his first year is only $5 million, according to some websites that I've seen. So, from the outside looking in, it didn't look like it was a super team friendly deal. Don't know the exact details, but it looks like they've structured it fairly well so that it's not gonna tie down too much of their cap space, so that they can sign guys like Dante Fowler and Jalen Ramsey and Yannick Ngakoue to some of these bigger deals when these guys come available. But yeah, that's also one I think that for me worries, that should be worrying the Titans, obviously, is that one of the abilities that the Titans had last year was to get pressure on Blake Bortles and force turnovers. So obviously with the interior of that offensive line looking to be a little bit more solid, I think it will just...
You talking about the Colts or the Jags?
I'm talking about the Jaguars.
Okay.
By them shoring up that interior offensive line, I think it's going to be ever so critical that the Titans can get pressure around the edges, with the interior of that line getting a little bit better. So just some things that kind of the Titans should be aware of is again, that need for the edge rush to continue to put pressure on Blake Bortles, because we've seen when you put pressure on Blake Bortles, he folds like a lawn chair. So, and we had to take at least one shot at Blake Bortles. I'm surprised we haven't taken another one this episode, but
yeah, we'll give him a break. He's adding some weapons, so I don't want to feed him any fuel and let those guys make him look good, because Safarian Jenkins is a guy who can make him look good. So we'll keep him on the back burner. He'll catch some flack next week once we come back with some hopefully updated free agency and a little bit of a better idea of where John Robinson's head is at heading into the draft, and kind of get a better idea of where we might go first and second round.
Yep, I totally agree. And then finally, we'll go over to the last team in the division, the Houston Texans. Obviously, the Texans this year are going to get Deshaun Watson back from injury, which will be a huge boost for them. I think Deonta Foreman also will be coming back from injury. They did lose, I want to say Marcus Gilchrist is his name, their starting safety. But the big splash signing that they had was the Honey Badger, Tyrann Mathieu. What are your first thoughts on that one, Taylor?
Well, I've been a fan of the Honey Badger since watching him in college at LSU. Basically, anytime he got his hands on the ball, he scored, until his days in Arizona on my fantasy team, on my IDP league. He was a guy that I drafted. So I'm very familiar with his athletic ability. I think the Texans got him for a killer deal. There was some grumbling around the league saying he took too little and he's setting the bar too low for the safety position. So I think that the Texans got a steal with the defensive front that they already have. Throw him on the backside. They've got a lot of flexibility with how they can attack you, because Matthew's not only a safety, but he's also a nickel corner. He's also an outside corner, and heck, he can also play outside linebacker, honestly, with the blitzing ability that he has. Even though he's undersized, he plays with the heart of a 10-foot-tall behemoth. So,
well, yeah, and that's why I got that nickname.
Yeah, the Honey Badger.
Yeah.
Honey Badger don't give a shit. That's
yeah,
exactly what it is, though. But we'll see. I think that he's going to be a huge part of the defense there, and I just hope that he doesn't cause too much trouble when we play them twice this season.
Yeah, I knew the Titans wouldn't really have a large need for him, especially after addressing the free agent market with Malcolm Butler. Sorry, but he was a guy who, like you said, he's a difference maker. And the last place I would have wanted him to go is a place where they've already got tons of difference makers on the line of scrimmage, like you mentioned. You got J.J. Watt, you got Jadeveon Clowney. In the linebacking core, you've got Whitney Merciless. So they've got lots of weapons on that defense, and that's going to be something to pay attention to. The one thing as a Texans fan, if I were a Texans fan, that I would be a little concerned about is the injury history of a lot of those guys on the defensive line. Obviously, J.J. Watt's had his fair share of injuries. Tyrann Mathieu has had his fair share of injuries. And then last year, I know Merciless had an injury that kept him out for most of the season. And Jadeveon Clowney has had injuries at the start of his career. So the Texans' defense is pretty scary if it stays healthy. Now, that may be a big if. I don't know how likely it is. A lot of those injuries, they say, aren't really related. But just something to kind of look at and kind of be aware of is the injury history of a lot of those players. So yeah, I think that's kind of going to be the thing to watch with that Texans defense, because if they stay healthy, they are going to be a scary defense, and I think the AFC South it's going to be tough to put points up in the AFC South. So hopefully LaFleur has his plays all ready to go and is what all the other stuff that he needs, because we're going to need to score some points in these games in the division. Otherwise, we might be in trouble.
Yeah, this year you're going to see a lot of points with the offenses that we have, and with Luck coming back, sounds like he's on track to return week 1. So I think that there's going to be some good competition this season when it comes to the AFC South. It could be the best division in football when it's all said and done. We'll have to wait and see, but it's looking like it's going to be a tough road to the playoffs.
Yeah, I think the best division to compare it to was the NFC South of last year. I mean, you saw how they had 3 teams that were separated by about a game. Obviously, the Buccaneers were kind of at the bottom of the barrel, but I don't see the Titans going through, or sorry, not the Titans, but I don't see the AFC South going through a lull like that this year of having a team that would be a top 10, a bottom 10 type of team. I think all 4 teams in this division are going to be able to finish somewhere around the 500 mark at worst. So it's going to be tough. Like you said, it'll be a tough road to the playoffs. I think the Titans can do it. They've made some of the key offseason additions that they've needed to. And again, like we mentioned with the draft coming up, I think John Robinson's got a plan. And I think we're going to see a lot of these guys get drafted that are going to make impacts fairly quickly with the Titans in some of those rotational roles. And some guys might step into bigger roles, but should be interesting. Obviously, again, free agency is still going on. Not a lot has happened over these last couple of days with regards to big names. The one that we'll be on the lookout for, like I mentioned, is Ndamukong Suh. That will play a pretty big factor in what the Titans decide to do, both in the rest of free agency and in the draft. So lots of stuff. I mean, the draft is still a month away, but there's lots of stuff that can happen in between now and then. So it'll be interesting. What do you think, Taylor?
Yeah, we'll have to wait and see what happens. The mock drafts are one of those things that you can do 1,000 of them, and most of the time every one of them is going to look different. So once this free agency plays out and the draft gets here, we'll really have some good stuff to talk about, and that'll be a good time. Now, we don't have to sit here and forecast or foreshadow. Yeah, we'll actually be able to talk about what we'll do game plan wise, what our scheme will look like, what our rotations will look like. So looking forward to that.
As am I. Football cannot come fast enough. I don't think I've ever been so excited for a draft in my life. So, yeah, that's it for us today here at View from the Stands. Be sure to stay tuned. We'll hopefully have some big news to report next week. But yeah, that's it from us here at the View from the Stands. Signing off, I guess you could say.
Until next time. Taylor. Yeah. Good night, you jabronis.
See you later, everybody.